So the Turks, and the big question we start off is, why are these people able to conquer so much? They're nomadic. They don't really have their own society, and it seems like they break off into all these like weird named groups, and then they take over whoever they run into. It's kind of the trend which you read about in the chapter, wasn't it? Like, then they went in there and they took over the Abbasid dynasty. Then they went to Byzantium and they started taking over land. Then they went to Delhi in India and they took it over. So the Turks are like a very bad guest. Don't invite them because they'll be running the place. All right, so the Turks. Our first historical reference to the Turks appears in Chinese records about 200 BC. They're often referred to a name which is kind of like the Huns. They're referred to a name which is kind of like the Huns. They are from, which would be best called like mid to southern Russia, or just like in the Mongolia region, same area the Mongols are from. They're nomadic people much like the Mongols in that area, except they're from like a little bit further north than the Mongols. They had their own writing, Turkish writing, which was first dated AD or CE, CE 730. So that's current era, 730. This Turkish writing and Turkish language still exists in many forms today. It's kind of like Latin. Latin broke off into a whole bunch of different languages. So does Turkish, or Turkish languages. The language I was speaking to you, that's Turkmen. That's like one of the original languages of the Turkish people. Goes into like Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and the most popular language in the family would be Turkish today, which the Turkish people in Turkey speak. All right. So these are nomadic people who spread out. Now when you read about the different groups like the Seljuks, the Gur Turks, the Oghuz Turks, those are basically like different branches. They're nomadic people, and do nomadic people stick together? No. They kind of break off into different bands. So it's kind of like, you know, different relatives of the same family would be a way to think about it. So let's talk about the Gur Turks, G-O-R-T-U-R-K-S. The Gur Turks, they were brought in by the Byzantine Empire. And you're going to see a pattern here. The Byzantine Empire says, you guys are really good fighters. So they bring them in as fighters to fight their battles. This is a lot like what the Romans did with the Germanic people. They invite them in. There's a problem when you start inviting foreigners in to be a part of your army. If they don't fully become part of the empire, what can happen? They might rebel, and now they're a big part of the army, and that's not going to be easy to stop. So, basically what happens, they were very good warriors. They fight for the Byzantine Empire, and then eventually they're like, well, they don't really see themselves as Byzantians, and they take over the Byzantine Empire slowly but surely. We see this is the Turks gradually make their way into Anatolia, which today we would call Turkey. Anatolia, we call it Turkey today. It's this peninsula thing right here that's not quite Europe, not quite Asia. And they go in here and they start taking over more and more land. And the Byzantines, there's really nothing they can do about it because the Turkish are better fighters. And the Byzantine Empire at this time is slowly falling, disintegrating, being taken over slowly by the Turkish people. So, the Turkish people, why did they start moving, and why did they decide that they were no longer going to be like nomadic and they were going to move into these areas? Because the Turkish people, many of them were in the Central Asia region. Actually, this is where I lived in Turkmenistan. They're like the relatives. And they started moving into all these areas. Why did they start moving? Why did they start migrating? One of the big reasons would be climate change. This is a desert region. And if it gets drier and hotter, even less likely you can live there, so you have to move. So one of the reasons why the Turks move is because of climate change. Another reason is because they start growing in population. Can nomadic civilizations be large? No, they have to be small. Nomadic civilizations have to be small. They can't have a large group of people traveling around hunting and gathering. It just won't work. And stronger neighbors start putting pressure on them. There's another emperor out here in Persia that's pushing them, so they start getting pushed off their land, and they come in here and start taking things over. So the Turkish people eventually embrace Islam. They become Muslims. And one of their leaders, Seljuk, unites them into a larger empire. One of their leaders, Seljuk, unites them into a larger empire. So, we had the Abbasid dynasty, which we read about quite a bit. The Abbasid dynasty in Baghdad was its capital, the Abbasid dynasty. Well, they make the exact same mistake the Byzantines do. Who do they hire as their warriors? The Turks. They hire them as warriors. The Turks get in the military, and then eventually what happens is one of their leaders says, you know what? I'm just going to unite all the other Turkish warriors and we're going to take the city of Baghdad. So the Turks then take the city of Baghdad and completely take it over. And Abbasid dynasty is no more. It's now a Turkish dynasty. So pretty much they end it because they're brought into the Abbasid dynasty as warriors. They don't fully become part of it. They still kind of keep their own Turkish identity, and they take over Baghdad. So this would be Tughril Bai. Tughril Bai, I'll write his name up there. And I'm probably mispronouncing that slightly. Tughril Bai was the leader who took over Baghdad from the Abbasid dynasty, and the Turkish people took power. Basically, he forced the caliph to acknowledge him as sultan. He brings his army, takes over the city, and says, I'm the new sultan, I'm the leader. All right, so again, like the Germanic people did in Rome, the Turkish people do this in both the Byzantine Empire and take over more and more of the land, and they also take over Baghdad, and now they unite and they become a very large Seljuk Turkish empire. They spread further. They go into Egypt. They take over what was called the Fatimid dynasty. And the Turkish people take over the Fatimid dynasty as well. And what will happen is, we'll get to this at the very end of this chapter, is the Turkish people will continue to spread, and eventually they'll take over all the Byzantine Empire, and they'll take over Constantinople as well. And then it will no longer be Constantinople. It will be called Istanbul, which is what it's still called today. So, can't go back to Constantinople. There's a whole song on that. It's now called Istanbul. So, that is pretty much what the Turkish people are able to do. The Crusades. We learned about the Crusades yesterday. When the Turkish people start taking over more and more of this land, they get control of Jerusalem. This does scare the Christians in the Crusade, and when the Crusades come, they do lose some of their land to the Christians. So when the Crusades come in 1097, 1099, that time period, like the late 1000s, early 1100s, when the Crusades come in, the Turks lose land, but by 1140, they're able to overturn that and gain a lot of this land back. By 1140, the Turkish people are able to regain a lot of their land, and they still keep on going. And actually, the Turkish people get pretty far. They get all the way to Vienna, which is in Austria, which is getting pretty close to like Germany in that area. So they get close to taking over Europe, which would have completely changed history if they would have taken over Europe. You guys wouldn't be speaking Spanish right now. Just to put it that way. You guys are Spanish speakers. You'd be... We'd be speaking more in Turkmen, or the Turkish language is what we'd probably be speaking in this class right now. And society would be a whole lot different if that would have happened. So there were several times where Muslim empires were very close to taking over Europe, and had that happened, everything's different. Society is just completely different if that happens.
Would it be for the better or for the worse?
You know, it's a good question. Would it be for the better or worse? You know, one of you who wrote a journal mentioned Hernan Cortez and said, I better not tell them about Hernan Cortez. And my first reaction was, tell them! Like, tell them when he gets off the boat to kill him. Was my first reaction. But we don't know. I mean, we can make inferences, we can make guesses, but the thing is, the Muslims had taken over Europe. Guarantee you I ain't speaking English right now. I'm not around in the same way. I'm a different person. You guys are different people because the Spanish never go and take over the Americas. Maybe we're speaking the Aztec languages still. Everything changes. Or maybe we're speaking Turkish languages right now. Or maybe we're speaking in Arabic. Everything would be different. And these couple hundred years from like 1,000 to 400, had Europe been taken over, which could have happened, all of society is different. Completely different. The era of European domination doesn't happen. All right. So we're going to stop right there.